Silence was the only thing Donovan Santoro feared. As the most ruthless capo in Chicago, he could handle gunfire, betrayal, and federal indictments, but he could not handle the silence of his 2-year-old daughter, Mia. She had never made a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, and certainly not a word. Doctors called it trauma. Donovan called it his punishment. But that silence shattered on a rainy Tuesday in a run-down diner, destroyed by a single, impossible word. When his mute daughter pointed a tiny finger at a trembling, impoverished waitress and screamed, "Mama!" Donovan didn't order coffee. He ordered the doors locked. The truth was about to cost someone their life. Rain lashed against the cracked plate glass window of Sal's all-night diner, blurring the neon lights of Chicago's South Loop into streaks of blood red and bruise purple. Inside, the air smelled of stale grease, lemon polish, and despair. Shannon Foster adjusted her apron, wincing as the coarse fabric rubbed against the fresh bruise on her hip, a parting gift from her landlord when she was 3 days late on rent. Shannon checked the clock. 2:40 a.m. The graveyard shift was usually dead, populated only by long-haul truckers and insomniacs, but tonight the atmosphere felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. She wiped the counter for the 10th time, her reflection in the metal napkin dispenser, showing a woman who looked far older than her 24 years. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and dark circles shadowed eyes that had once been a vibrant green, but were now dulled by exhaustion. "Shannon, quit scrubbing the varnish off the counter," Sal grunted from the kitchen, the sizzle of bacon punctuating his raspy voice. "You're making me nervous." "Just keeping busy, Sal," Shannon replied, her voice soft. "Rent is due again on Tuesday. I need the hours." She didn't mention that she was also saving for a lawyer. 2 years ago, Shannon had woken up in a charity ward at Cook County Hospital with a jagged scar on her hairline and a hollow ache in her chest that no doctor could explain. The police report said car accident. The medical file said she had been alone. But Shannon had nightmares of a baby crying, a phantom infant she couldn't remember bearing, but whose weight she felt in her arms every time she slept. They told her it was a side effect of the head trauma, a psychological manifestation of loss. Shannon knew they were lying. Headlights cut through the gloom outside, blindingly bright. Not the yellow wash of a taxi, but the stark, blue-white beams of luxury SUVs. 3 black Escalades pulled up to the curb, idling in a formation that suggested military precision. The diner went silent. The 2 truckers in the corner booth stopped chewing. "Trouble," Sal whispered, peeking through the service window. "Shannon, go to the back, now." Before she could move, the diner door chimed. It wasn't a gentle sound. It felt like an alarm. 4 men entered first. They wore suits that cost more than Shannon would earn in a decade, tailored to hide the distinct bulge of shoulder holsters. They fanned out, checking the corners, their eyes scanning the room with the predatory efficiency of sharks. Then, the center parted. Donovan Santoro walked in. Even without reading the tabloids, Shannon knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew the Santoro family. They owned the construction unions, the shipping yards, and half the politicians in the state. Donovan was the heir apparent, a man described by the press as a philanthropist, and by the streets as the angel of death. He was terrifyingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of frozen obsidian. He shook the rain from a black wool coat, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. But it wasn't the gun at his hip or the scar cutting through his left eyebrow that froze Shannon in place. It was what he was carrying. Strapped to his chest in a velvet-lined carrier was a toddler. The child was small, perhaps 2 years old, with a mop of dark curls and large, fearful eyes that scanned the room with an intensity that mirrored her father's. Donovan didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at Sal. He walked straight to the booth nearest the heater, sat down, and unbuckled the carrier with surprisingly gentle hands. The 4 guards turned their backs to him, forming a living wall between the boss and the rest of the diner. "Coffee?" Donovan said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and gravelly. "Black and warm milk." Sal shoved a mug into Shannon's hands. His hands were shaking. "Don't look him in the eye," he hissed. "Just serve him and get back here." Shannon took a breath that rattled in her lungs. She filled the mug, heated a small bottle of milk, and walked toward the booth. Her legs felt like lead. She had served drunks, addicts, and thieves. But this was different. This was power in its rawest form. She approached the table. Donovan was staring out the window, his hand resting protectively on the toddler's back. The little girl was staring at the table surface, completely still. She looked like a doll that had been broken and glued back together. "Here is your coffee, sir," Shannon whispered, placing the mug down. Donovan didn't turn. "Leave the milk." Shannon reached out to place the warm bottle near the child. As her hand moved into the light, the silver locket she wore, a cheap trinket she had woken up with at the hospital, dangled from her wrist. It caught the overhead light, flashing a brief reflection. The little girl's head snapped up. Shannon froze. The child's eyes were wide, a startling, unique shade of violet blue. A sharp pain shot through Shannon's temples. Violet eyes. I know those eyes. The memory was like a jagged shard of glass, a flash of a sterile room, the smell of antiseptic, and a baby with those exact eyes looking up at her. The toddler stared at Shannon. The child's lip quivered. Her tiny hands, which had been clenched into fists, opened. She reached out, her fingers grasping for the air between them. Donovan turned, his brow furrowed. "Mia, what is it?" He looked from his daughter to the waitress. His hand drifted toward the inside of his jacket. The little girl, Mia, ignored her father. She leaned forward against the table, straining against the strap of her high chair carrier. Her gaze locked onto Shannon's face with a desperate, heart-breaking recognition. Then the silence broke. "Ma." The sound was rusty, like a gate that hadn't been opened in years. Donovan went rigid. He stared at his daughter, his face draining of color. "Mia! Mama!" The scream tore through the diner. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. Mia pointed her finger directly at Shannon's chest, tears instantly spilling over her cheeks. "Mama! Up, Mama!" Shannon dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the linoleum, sending shards of glass and scalding liquid exploding across the floor. She didn't hear the crash. She only heard the word echoing in her soul, unlocking a door she didn't know existed. Tears blurred her vision without permission. "Baby," she whispered, the word slipping out before she could stop it. The sound of gun hammers cocking filled the room. In less than a second, 4 Glocks were trained on Shannon's head. Donovan Santoro stood up slowly. The shock on his face had been replaced by a mask of cold, lethal fury. He looked at his weeping daughter, who was reaching frantically for this stranger, and then he looked at Shannon. "Who sent you?" Donovan asked, his voice deadly quiet. I don't," Shannon stammered, raising her hands. "My daughter hasn't spoken a single word since the day she was born." Donovan stepped over the broken glass, ignoring the hot coffee soaking his Italian leather shoes. He got into Shannon's face, close enough that she could smell the expensive scotch and gunpowder on him. She has never called anyone that. Not even the nannies. Not even me. He grabbed Shannon's wrist, his grip like iron, pulling her arm up to look at her face. He scanned her features, the nose, the chin, the eyes, searching for a ghost. "Mama! Mama!" Mia was wailing now, a sound of pure devastation. "Adrian!" Donovan barked, without looking away from Shannon. The largest bodyguard stepped forward. "Boss! Clear the diner, kill the cameras." Donovan's eyes were black holes, threatening to swallow Shannon whole. "And bring the car around. She's coming with us." "Wait, no!" Shannon tried to pull back, panic finally overriding the shock. "I don't know you. I've never seen her before. Please." "You're lying," Donovan hissed, pulling her closer until their noses almost touched. "Because my daughter doesn't lie, and she thinks you're the woman who died 2 years ago." The ride was a blur of motion and terror. Shannon was sandwiched between 2 guards in the back of the second SUV. They hadn't handcuffed her, but the threat was clear. Move, and you die. She watched the city streak by, her mind racing. The woman who died 2 years ago. The timeline matched. The accident. The coma. The empty space in her memory where a life should have been. She looked at the back of the lead SUV, where Donovan and the child, Mia, were riding. Why did she call me that? Shannon touched her own face. Do I look like her mother? Or, am I? The thought was insane. Shannon Foster was a nobody, an orphan raised in the foster system of Ohio before moving to Chicago. She had records, tax returns, a life. But as the car turned off the highway and headed toward the Gold Coast, the affluent heart of the city, doubt gnawed at her. Why were there no photos of her between the ages of 20 and 22? Why did she have a C-section scar that the doctors at Cook County claimed was from an appendectomy gone wrong? The convoy slowed, pulling into the private underground entrance of the Sovereign Tower, a glass needle piercing the Chicago skyline. This was Santoro territory. Out! Adrian commanded. They marched her into a private elevator. The numbers climbed. 40, 50, 60. Penthouse. When the doors opened, Shannon gasped. The space was cavernous, a palace of marble and glass overlooking Lake Michigan. But it felt cold. Sterile. There were no toys on the floor, no family photos on the mantel. It was a fortress, not a home. Donovan was already there, pacing the living room. He had removed his coat, revealing a tailored vest and dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose muscular forearms covered in intricate tattoos. Mia was in his arms, clinging to his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. She was still sobbing, soft, hiccuping sounds that tore at Shannon's heart. Donovan turned as Shannon entered. He signaled the guards to stay by the door. Sit. He pointed to a white leather armchair that looked like it had never been sat in. Shannon remained standing, clutching her apron. I want to go home. I have a shift. Sal has been compensated, Donovan interrupted. He thinks you quit. If you leave this room without my permission, you won't make it to the lobby. He walked toward her, the rhythmic thump-thump of his dress shoes echoing on the marble. He stopped 5 feet away. Mia lifted her head. When she saw Shannon, her eyes lit up through the tears. "Mama," she whimpered, reaching out again. Donovan tightened his hold on the child, his jaw clenching. "Stop doing that," he growled at Shannon. "Stop looking at her like that." "I'm not doing anything," Shannon cried, tears stinging her eyes. "She's the one calling for me. I told you, I don't know who you are." "My wife," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "was named Elena. She died in a fire at our estate in Tuscany 2 years ago. Her body was never recovered, only traces." He stepped closer. "You have her eyes. You have her nose. But Eleanor had a scar on her left collarbone from a childhood fall. Show me." "What? No!" Shannon grabbed her collar. Donovan didn't ask twice. He handed Mia to a hesitant maid who had appeared from the hallway and lunged at Shannon. "Don't touch me!" Shannon screamed, fighting back. She wasn't a trained killer, but she was a girl who had survived the foster system. She stomped on Donovan's expensive shoe and tried to shove him away. He didn't even flinch. He pinned her arms to her sides with one hand and ripped the collar of her uniform down with the other. Shannon squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for a blow. Silence returned to the room. Donovan's breath hitched. His fingers traced the skin of her collarbone. It was trembling. Shannon opened her eyes. Donovan was staring at her skin. There was no scar there, just pale, unblemished skin. He exhaled, a sound that was half relief, half disappointment. He stepped back, releasing her. "No scar," he muttered. "It's not her. I watched the house burn down. Can I go now?" Shannon pulled her uniform together, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "No," Donovan said, turning his back to her, "because my daughter, who has been mute for her entire life, just spoke to you. She thinks you are her mother. Until I figure out why, you belong to me." "I am not a piece of property," Shannon snapped, fear giving way to anger. "You can't just keep me here." "I can do whatever I want, Miss Foster," Donovan said, walking over to a heavy oak desk. He picked up a file, her file. He must have had his team run a background check in the 20 minutes it took to drive here. That terrified her more than the guns. "Shannon Foster," he read. "Foster child, high school dropout, worked at 3 diners in 2 years, no living relatives, massive debt from medical bills incurred after a car accident in 2024. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Tell me about the accident." "I don't remember it," Shannon said defensively. "I woke up in the hospital. They said I hit a tree." "Which hospital?" "Cook County." Donovan frowned. "And before that? Where were you living?" Shannon paused. The fog in her mind swirled. "I was in Ohio, I think. I moved here looking for work." "You think?" Donovan threw the file down. "There is a gap, Shannon. A 6-month gap in your employment history right before the accident. Where were you?" "I don't know," Shannon yelled. "Why does it matter?" "Because," Donovan walked back to her, his intensity returning. "My wife didn't die in a fire immediately. She was kidnapped first. She was missing for 6 months before the house in Tuscany burned down. The exact same 6 months. You can't remember." The room spun. Shannon grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. That's a coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences," Donovan said. "I believe in leverage, and someone planted you in that diner." "Nobody planted me. I was wiping tables." Before Donovan could respond, the maid rushed back into the room. She looked terrified. "Sir?" "Mr. Santoro." "What is it, Maria?" Donovan snapped. "It's Mia, sir. She's hysterical. She's throwing herself against the nursery door. She's hyperventilating. I can't calm her down. She's turning blue, sir." Donovan's face lost its hardness instantly. He sprinted toward the hallway, Shannon following instinctively. They burst into the nursery. It was a room fit for a princess, filled with soft pinks and plush toys, but the scene was a nightmare. Mia was on the floor, screaming silently now, gasping for air, her face turning a terrifying shade of purple. She was clawing at her own throat, panic in her eyes. "Mia, breathe!" Donovan scooped her up, patting her back, but the child was too far gone in her panic attack. She was flailing, fighting him, her eyes rolling back. "She's choking on her own spit," the maid cried. "I called Dr. Evans. He's 20 minutes away," Donovan roared. "She needs air now." Shannon didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk. She saw a child dying. She shoved past the bodyguard at the door and dropped to her knees beside Donovan. "Give her to me," Shannon commanded. "Get back," Donovan snarled. Give her to me, or she dies." Shannon's voice rang with an authority she didn't know she possessed. Donovan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then passed the thrashing child to Shannon. Shannon didn't rock her. She didn't shush her. She pulled the child against her chest, skin to skin, and began to hum. It wasn't a random tune. It was a melody that rose from the depths of her subconscious, a haunting, low lullaby in a language Shannon didn't speak. Italian. "Ninna nanna, ninna o, questo bimbo a chilo do." The effect was instantaneous. Mia went rigid, then limp. Her gasping breaths slowed. Her tiny hands grabbed Shannon's shirt, twisting into the fabric. The purple faded from her face, replaced by a flush of exhaustion. She buried her nose in Shannon's neck and inhaled deeply, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. "Mama," Mia whispered, her eyes closing. Shannon continued to hum, tears streaming down her own face. She knew the song. How did she know the song? She looked up. Donovan was standing over them. But the gun wasn't in his hand anymore. He was staring at Shannon with a look of absolute horror. "That song," Donovan whispered, his voice shaking. Elena wrote that song. She never recorded it. She never sang it to anyone but the baby in the womb. No one else knows it. He dropped to his knees, eye level with Shannon. "Who are you?" he asked. And this time there was no anger, only fear. "Who are you really?" The silence in the penthouse was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of grief that Donovan had lived with for 2 years. It was a tense, electric silence, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. Dr. Evans arrived 20 minutes later, looking disheveled but alert. He was a graying man in his 60s who had patched up more bullet holes than appendectomies. He walked into the nursery, his medical bag gripping his hand like a lifeline, and stopped dead. Shannon was sitting in the rocking chair, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Mia was asleep on her chest, her tiny hand gripping Shannon's uniform so tightly her knuckles were white. Donovan stood by the window, smoking a cigarette, something he never did in the house, watching them with the intensity of a hawk circling prey. "She's breathing normally?" Dr. Evans asked, keeping his voice low. "She fell asleep 10 minutes ago," Donovan said, crushing the cigarette into a crystal ashtray. "She won't let go of the girl. If Shannon moves, Mia starts screaming again." "Shannon," Dr. Evans repeated, looking at the waitress. He recognized the look of a woman who had been dragged through hell. "And who is Shannon?" "That's what you're going to tell me," Donovan said. "Check Mia first. Then I want a full workup on the woman. Blood, DNA, scans, everything." Dr. Evans approached cautiously. He listened to Mia's heart without waking her, checking her pupil response gently. "Her heart rate is elevated, but she's stable. It was a panic attack, Donovan. Severe emotional shock." He looked at Shannon. "She seems to be the anchor. Now check her." Donovan gestured to Shannon. Shannon flinched as the doctor turned to her. "I'm fine. I just want to go home." "You are home," Donovan said, the words slipping out before he could catch them. He corrected himself. "You are where I say you are. Evans, look at her collarbone, and then check for surgical alteration." "Surgical?" Evans raised an eyebrow. "You think she's a construct? Just do it." Shannon had to hand the sleeping Mia to Donovan. The transfer was delicate. Mia whimpered, sensing the loss of contact, but Donovan hushed her with a rare tenderness, pressing her cheek against his vest. He stood back, watching as Evans began his examination of Shannon. Evans was thorough. He checked her pulse, her eyes, and the old injury on her hairline. Then he tilted her head back, pushing her hair behind her ears. He frowned, leaning in closer with a penlight. "Interesting," Evans muttered. "What?" Donovan stepped closer. "Turn around, Miss Foster," Evans instructed. He lifted her hair at the nape of her neck. He ran his fingers along her jawline. "There are micro-scarring lines here, and here behind the ears. Very faint. You'd miss them if you weren't looking for them." "What kind of scars?" Shannon asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Precision incisions," Evans said, his voice grave. "The kind used in high-end reconstructive maxillofacial surgery, specifically to reshape the jaw and nose." The room spun. Shannon grabbed the doctor's arm. "I've never had plastic surgery. I'm a waitress. I can't even afford dental." "Not recently," Evans said, looking at Donovan. "These scars are about 2 years old. They've healed perfectly. Someone spent a fortune on this face, Donovan. They didn't just fix her. They changed her." Donovan's face went pale. He handed the sleeping child to the maid, Maria, who was waiting at the door. "Take her to the guest room. Stay with her." Once the child was gone, Donovan crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing Shannon's chin and forcing her to look at him. He stared at her face, really looking this time. He looked past the familiarity and saw the differences. The nose was slightly upturned. Elena's had been straight. The chin was softer. "They changed her face," Donovan whispered, a cold fury rising in his chest. "They took my wife, and they carved her up so I wouldn't recognize her." "But the scar," Donovan said, looking at Evans. "Elena had a scar on her collarbone. This woman doesn't." Evans unbuttoned the top of Shannon's uniform again, ignoring her protest. He shined the UV light from his kit onto her skin. He hummed. "Dermal abrasion, laser resurfacing. Look closely, Donovan. The texture of the skin here is smoother, thinner. Someone removed the scar. They erased the identifier." Shannon felt sick. She pushed Evans away and stumbled toward the bathroom attached to the nursery. She fell to her knees in front of the toilet and retched. She was a puzzle, a project. Someone had taken a knife to her face, erased her memory, and dropped her in a diner to rot. Donovan appeared in the doorway. He wasn't aggressive anymore. He looked shattered. "We need the DNA," Donovan said, his voice hollow. "Evans, take the sample. Rush it. I want results in 2 hours. Wake up the lab director if you have to." "And if it's her?" Evans asked softly. "If it's her," Donovan looked at the trembling woman on the bathroom floor, "then I'm going to burn this city to the ground to find the person who did this." After Evans left with the blood vials, Donovan didn't lock Shannon in a cell. He led her to the master bedroom, his bedroom. "You stay here," he said. "The guest room isn't secure enough." "I don't belong here," Shannon whispered. She walked over to a massive vanity mirror. She touched her own face, her nose, her jaw. She felt like a stranger in her own skin. "I don't even know who I am." "You're Shannon Foster right now," Donovan said, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a decanter. He handed one to her. "Drink. It helps." Shannon took the glass. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Donovan. "If I am her, if I am Elena, why didn't I come back? Why didn't I remember you?" "Because," Donovan said, looking into the dark liquid in his glass, "Elena was the softest soul I ever knew. She wasn't built for this world. If she saw something traumatic enough, maybe her mind just broke. Maybe forgetting was the only way to survive." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Or maybe someone made sure you wouldn't remember. They drugged you, conditioned you. Who would do that?" "That," Donovan said, his eyes hardening into flint, "is the question." By dawn, the Sovereign Tower was on total lockdown. The steel shutters were down over the lobby glass, and the private security team had been doubled. To the outside world, it looked like Donovan Santoro was preparing for a corporate takeover. In reality, he was hunting a ghost. Donovan sat in his study, the digital clock reading 5:45 a.m. He hadn't slept. He was staring at a list of names, his inner circle. If Eleanor had been kidnapped, held for 6 months, surgically altered and dumped, it wasn't an outside job. The security at the Tuscan estate had been impeccable. The codes were changed weekly. Only family had the codes. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't the timid knock of a servant. It was the confident rap of an equal. "Come in," Donovan said, sliding his gun under a stack of papers. The door opened, and Marco Santoro walked in. Marco was Donovan's cousin, the underboss of the family. He was older, smoother, with a smile that showed too many teeth. He wore a grey suit that cost more than Shannon's life earnings. "Donovan," Marco said, spreading his hands. "The boys are nervous. You locked down the tower. You pulled the perimeter teams in. Is there a war coming I don't know about?" "Maybe," Donovan said, watching Marco's face carefully. "There was an incident at a diner last night." "A diner?" Marco laughed, pouring himself a coffee from the side table. "Since when do you eat at diners? And why was Mia with you? That's reckless, cousin." "Mia spoke," Donovan said. Marco froze. The coffee cup hovered halfway to his lips. "She... what?" "She spoke. She called a waitress, Mama." Marco set the cup down slowly. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Not joy. Calculation. "That's a miracle. But the girl is traumatized, Donovan. She sees a blonde woman. She gets confused." "The woman knew Elena's lullaby," Donovan lied. Shannon hadn't sung it in front of Marco, but Donovan wanted to see the reaction. "The one Elena wrote." Marco's face went rigid. "That's impossible. Elena is dead. We buried a coffin, Donovan. We found the dental records." "We found teeth," Donovan corrected. "Loose teeth in a pile of ash. Easy to plant." Marco walked to the window, turning his back to Donovan. "So, where is this waitress? You didn't bring a stray dog home, did you?" "She's in the master bedroom." "You put a stranger in your bed?" Marco turned around, his face flushed. "Are you insane? She could be an assassin, a plant by the Russians or the Triads." "She's being watched," Donovan said calmly. "Evans is running a DNA test. Results will be here in an hour." "I see." Marco checked his watch. "Well, I should go check on the perimeter. If we have a guest, we need to be secure." "Do that," Donovan said. As soon as the door clicked shut, Donovan picked up his phone. He dialed the head of his security detail. "Watch Marco. Don't let him leave the building. And put 2 more men on the bedroom door. Now." Upstairs, Shannon was pacing. The luxury of the room felt like a cage. She had showered, scrubbing the diner grease from her skin, and changed into a silk robe she found in the closet. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. She walked to the bookshelf. Her fingers traced the spines of the books. Italian architecture, the history of Rome, Dante's Inferno. She pulled out a copy of The Great Gatsby. It fell open to a marked page. In the margins, written in delicate, looping cursive, was a note. "Donovan, this reminds me of the night we met. You, looking at the green light. Me, the fool across the bay." Shannon stared at the handwriting. Her hand started to tremble. She grabbed a pen from the nightstand and scribbled her name on a piece of hotel stationery. Shannon Foster. She held the 2 samples side by side. The S was identical. The loop of the E was a fingerprint. She gasped, dropping the book. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was her handwriting. "Oh God," she whispered. "It's me. I am her." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The waitress, the poverty, the loneliness, it was all a lie. She had a husband, a child, a life of unimaginable wealth and danger. The door handle turned. Shannon spun around. "Donovan!" It wasn't Donovan. A man in a housekeeping uniform entered. He was holding a tray with a silver teapot. He kept his head down. "Compliments of Mr. Santoro, ma'am. Tea for the nerves." "I didn't ask for tea," Shannon said, stepping back, her instincts, honed by 2 years of living on the edge of poverty, flared. The man's shoes were wrong. They were heavy combat boots, not the soft-soled shoes the staff wore. "Mr. Santoro insisted," the man said, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. He looked up. His eyes were cold, dead things. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. "Who are you?" Shannon backed toward the balcony doors. "Nothing personal, Elena," the man said, using her real name. "You were supposed to stay dead. Marco paid a lot of money to make sure you were gone. You coming back? It complicates the succession." "Marco?" Shannon's mind flashed. A face, a smiling man at a wedding. Cousin Marco. He was the best man. "And he'll be the Don by tonight," the assassin lunged. Shannon screamed and threw the heavy book at him. It struck him in the face, buying her a second. She scrambled over the bed, knocking over a lamp. The assassin vaulted the bed, grabbing her by the ankle. Shannon kicked out, her heel connecting with his nose. He grunted, but didn't let go. He dragged her down, the needle gleaming in the morning light. "Hold still," he hissed. "It's just an overdose. Painless." "No." Shannon clawed at the carpet. Suddenly, the balcony glass shattered inward. A massive black shape hurtled into the room. It was a German shepherd, one of the guard dogs from the perimeter. But behind it was Donovan. Donovan didn't hesitate. He saw the man. He saw the needle. He fired 2 shots. The first bullet took the assassin in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second took him in the knee. The man collapsed, dropping the syringe. Donovan was on him in an instant. He didn't ask questions. He pistol-whipped the man across the face, once, twice, 3 times, until the assassin was unconscious and bleeding on the Persian rug. Donovan stood up, his chest heaving. He turned to Shannon. She was huddled in the corner, shaking violently. He rushed to her, dropping the gun, and pulled her into his arms. "Did he touch you? Did he stick you with that needle?" "No," Shannon sobbed, burying her face in his shirt. He said Marco sent him. He called me Elena." Donovan went still. The embrace tightened, becoming protective, possessive. "Marco," he whispered into her hair. The name was a curse. The door burst open again. Adrian and 4 guards rushed in, guns drawn. "Boss, we heard shots." "Take this piece of trash to the basement," Donovan said, gesturing to the unconscious assassin. "Keep him alive. I want to peel him apart, slowly." "And Marco?" Adrian asked, looking at the carnage. "Marco is currently in the West Wing," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze hell. "Seal the exits. No one leaves." Just then, Dr. Evans ran into the room, waving a tablet. He stopped, seeing the blood, the shattered glass, and the sobbing woman in Donovan's arms. "Donovan!" Evans gasped. "The results! The DNA!" Donovan looked up, his arms still wrapped around Shannon. "Tell me." Evans looked at Shannon, his eyes wide with awe. "It's a 99.999% match," Evans said. "It's not a sibling, it's not a clone. Donovan, it's Elena. She's alive." Donovan closed his eyes. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped and tracked through the blood smear on his cheek. He buried his face in Shannon's neck, breathing in her scent. The scent he had mourned for 730 days. "Welcome home, amore mio," he whispered. Shannon didn't pull away. The word unlocked something deep in her chest, a memory of warmth, of safety, of this man's arms. "Donovan," she whispered back, but the reunion was cut short by the sound of an explosion. The floor beneath them shook. The alarms began to wail. "The West Wing!" Adrian shouted, looking at his earpiece. "Explosion in the West Wing! It's Marco!" "He's trying to run," Donovan snarled. He stood up, pulling Shannon with him. He handed her a spare gun from his ankle holster. "Do you remember how to use this?" he asked. Shannon looked at the heavy metal in her hand. Her fingers naturally found the safety and clicked it off. Her stance shifted, feet shoulder-width apart. Muscle memory. "I think so," she said, her voice steeling. "Good," Donovan said, looking at the door. "Because we're going to kill my cousin. Together." The Sovereign Tower was no longer a palace. It was a war zone. The explosion in the West Wing had triggered the fire suppression systems, filling the corridors with a thick, choking mist of halon gas and water. Alarms blared a rhythmic, deafening pulse that vibrated in Shannon's teeth. "Stay behind me!" Donovan shouted over the noise, racking the slide of his custom 1911. Shannon, Elena, ran close on his heels. Her silk robe was soaked, sticking to her skin, and she had discarded her slippers, running barefoot over the cold marble and shattered glass. The gun in her hand felt heavy, but oddly natural. Every step unlocked a fragment of a memory. Target practice at the country house. Donovan's hands correcting her grip. The smell of cordite and pine. "Where is Mia?" Shannon screamed, grabbing Donovan's arm. "You said she was in the guest room. That's near the West Wing." Donovan's face was a mask of terrified determination. Maria was with her. They should have moved to the panic room. They turned a corner and skidded to a halt. The hallway leading to the guest suites was gone. A massive hole had been blown in the floor, revealing the twisted steel skeleton of the building and the smoking wreckage on the floor below. "Marco!" Donovan spat the name like poison. He didn't just try to escape, he tried to take out the air. Across the gap, through the smoke, they saw movement. Marco stood on the other side of the chasm, flanked by 3 mercenaries in tactical gear. He looked disheveled, his expensive suit covered in plaster dust. But his eyes were manic, and in his arms, screaming and kicking, was Mia. "Donovan!" Marco roared, his voice cracking. "I told you to leave it alone. I told you she was dead." "Put her down, Marco!" Donovan raised his weapon, but he couldn't fire. Marco was using the child as a human shield. "Mama! Dada!" Mia shrieked, her tiny arms reaching across the void. Shannon felt a rage so pure, so hot, it burned away the last of the fog in her mind. This was her baby. This was the child she had mourned in her dreams for 2 years. "Marco!" Shannon stepped forward, leveling her gun. "Look at me!" Marco flinched. He stared at her, and for the first time, true fear flickered in his eyes. "Elena, you're supposed to be a pile of ash." "You missed," Shannon said, her voice ice-cold. "You tried to kill me, you tried to erase me, but I'm still here, and now I'm going to kill you." "You can't," Marco laughed nervously, backing away toward the emergency stairwell. "I have the girl. You shoot me, I drop her down the shaft. You want to see if she bounces." "Don't you dare!" Donovan roared, stepping to the edge of the pit. "Back off!" Marco signaled his men. "Kill them!" The mercenaries opened fire. Donovan tackled Shannon to the ground as bullets chipped the marble walls above them. "Go!" he yelled. "Flank them! Use the service corridor! I'll draw their fire!" "I'm not leaving you!" "You're not leaving her!" Donovan looked at her, his eyes blazing with love and desperation. "Get our daughter back, Elena. Go!" Shannon scrambled backward on her hands and knees, then sprinted toward a hidden panel in the wainscoting. A servant's passage she suddenly remembered from a time when she used to sneak down to the kitchen for midnight snacks. The memory was crisp, vivid. I am Elena Santoro, she thought, and I am coming for my blood. She kicked the panel open and dove into the dark, narrow tunnel as gunfire erupted behind her. The service corridor was dark, smelling of dust and old wires. Shannon ran blindly, guided only by instinct and the blueprint of the building that was reassembling itself in her mind. She emerged 3 floors down, bursting into the emergency stairwell, just as the heavy steel door above slammed shut. She heard footsteps thundering down the metal stairs. Marco was fleeing to the garage. He had a private armored car waiting. She knew his escape protocols because she had helped design them. Shannon didn't run down the stairs. That would be too slow. She looked at the center gap between the railings. It was a straight drop to the basement garage level. She holstered the gun, grabbed the railing, and vaulted over. She caught the railing of the floor below. The impact, jarring her shoulders, swung her legs over and dropped again. It was reckless. It was insane. It was something only a desperate mother would do. She hit the concrete floor of the garage level, rolling to absorb the impact. Her knee cracked against the ground, sending a bolt of agony up her leg, but she forced herself up. The garage was dimly lit. In the center, an armored Mercedes engine roared to life. Marco was shoving Mia into the back seat. The child was limp now, exhausted from screaming. "Hurry up!" Marco screamed at his driver. Shannon didn't shout. She didn't announce her presence. She raised the gun, took a breath, and fired. The first shot shattered the driver's side window. The driver slumped over the wheel, the horn blaring a continuous, mournful note. Marco spun around, pulling Mia out of the car and holding a gun to her temple. "Stay back. I'll do it. I swear to God, Elena, I'll paint the walls with her." Shannon stopped 10 yards away. She was panting, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead, her bare feet black with soot. She looked like a vengeance demon rising from hell. "Let her go, Marco," she said softly. "It's over. Donovan is coming. The building is sealed. You have nowhere to go." "I can take her with me," Marco yelled, backing toward a secondary exit. "I'll trade her for a chopper. You'll die," Shannon interrupted. "Right here, right now." "You don't have the guts," Marco sneered. "You were always weak, Elena. Playing charity worker, rescuing stray dogs. You don't have the killer instinct." "I didn't," Shannon agreed. She took a step forward. "But then you stole 2 years of my life. You made me a waitress. You made me scrub floors while my daughter thought I was dead." She took another step. "I'm not Elena anymore, Marco. And I'm not Shannon." Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. Shannon saw the twitch in his tendon. Time slowed down. She dropped to her knees, sliding across the oil-slicked concrete. As she slid, she fired upward. It was an impossible shot, a 1 in a million prayer. The bullet struck Marco's hand, the hand holding the gun to Mia's head. His weapon clattered to the floor. He screamed, clutching his mangled fingers. Mia fell to the ground, scrambling away. "Mia, run to Mama!" Shannon screamed, opening her arms. The toddler didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the garage and collided with Shannon, burying her face in her mother's chest. Shannon wrapped her body around the child, shielding her, turning her back to Marco. Marco, sobbing in pain, lunged for his fallen gun with his good hand. "I'll kill you both!" A single thunderous shot rang out. Marco's head snapped back. He collapsed backward, his eyes staring unseeingly at the fluorescent lights. Donovan stood at the stairwell entrance, smoke rising from the barrel of his gun. He walked over, kicked the weapon away from Marco's body, and didn't even look down at his dead cousin. He dropped his gun and fell to his knees beside his wife and daughter. "Elena," he choked out, wrapping his massive arms around them both. Shannon looked up, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. She kissed Mia's head, then looked at her husband. "I remember," she whispered. "Donovan, I remember everything." 3 months had passed since the night the Sovereign Tower burned, and the scars on the building had been repaired with steel and fresh glass. The scars on the family, however, were healing differently, hardening into armor. The grand ballroom of the Santoro estate was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and nervous whispers. Tonight was not merely a gala, it was a resurrection. The elite of Chicago's underworld, politicians, judges, union leaders, and rival syndicate heads had gathered with the appetite of vultures, eager to confirm the rumors. They whispered that Donovan Santoro had gone mad with grief. They whispered that his wife was an imposter, a broken waitress dragged up from the gutter to play a role. They expected to see a fragile doll, glued together by Donovan's delusion. They were wrong. At the top of the grand staircase, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The orchestra abruptly stopped playing. A hush fell over the room, so absolute that the clinking of ice in a crystal glass sounded like a gunshot. Donovan Santoro stepped into the light. He looked more imposing than ever, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, his stance radiating the lethal confidence of a predator who has successfully defended his territory. But for the first time in years, the room didn't look at him. All eyes were devoured by the woman on his arm. Elena Santoro did not walk. She glided, her movement possessing a lethal grace that hadn't been there 3 years ago. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her frame like a second skin, the fabric cascading to the floor to hide the faint, fading burn scars on her ankles, battle wounds she refused to erase. Her hair, once kept in a modest bun during her life as Elena the wife, and a messy knot as Shannon the waitress, now flowed in loose, defiant waves around her shoulders. But it was her face that stopped the breath in their throats. It was Eleanor's face, yes, but the softness was gone. The naive girl who had been kidnapped from her garden was dead. In her place stood a woman who had scrubbed floors for minimum wage, who had been erased and forgotten, and who had clawed her way back from the dead with a gun in her hand. "She looks different," a rival capo whispered near the front, his glass trembling slightly. "She looks like him," his associate replied, nodding toward Donovan. They reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Donovan led her to the center of the room, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He took a microphone from a trembling master of ceremonies. "Thank you all for coming," Donovan's voice boomed, resonating off the vaulted ceiling. "There have been misunderstandings regarding my family's stability, rumors of weakness, tragedies." He paused, his dark eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to speak. "But fire does not destroy gold," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "It only refines it. I want to reintroduce my wife, the mother of my heir, Elena Santoro." He handed the microphone to her. Elena took it. Her hand was steady. She looked out at the faces of the people who had attended her memorial service 2 years ago, the people who had likely conspired with Marco, or at least turned a blind eye to his ambition. "It is good to be home," she said, her voice clear, commanding, and laced with a new, steely timbre. "I have heard the stories you tell, that I was lost, that I was weak." She took a slow step forward, closing the distance between herself and the front row. "I have walked through hell," she continued, her gaze locking onto a rival boss who had been encroaching on Santoro shipping lines during her absence. The man swallowed hard, his face draining of color as she stared him down. "I have lived in the shadows. I have been hungry. I have been forgotten. and I have survived." She let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. "Let this be clear. The Santoro family is not just restored. We are evolved. Anyone who threatens this house, anyone who dares to look at my daughter with anything but respect." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile of sharp edges. "Will answer to me." She handed the microphone back to Donovan. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her with a mixture of reverence and awe. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a public declaration of her power. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous, driven not by politeness but by fear and respect. Hours later, the music had faded, and the last luxury car had pulled away from the gates. The estate was quiet. Donovan and Eleanor stood on the balcony of the nursery, the cool night air washing over them. Inside the room, bathed in the soft glow of a night light, 3-year-old Mia was sleeping soundly, one arm draped over a large, plush German shepherd. Donovan wrapped his arms around Eleanor's waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He breathed in the scent of her, jasmine and rain, grounding himself in the reality of her presence. "You terrified them tonight," he murmured, his vibration humming against her back. "I think half the room was ready to pledge allegiance to you before dessert was served." Elena touched her neck. There, resting against the millions of dollars worth of diamonds in the Santoro crest, was a cheap, tarnished silver locket. It was the only thing she had kept from her life as Shannon Foster. "I needed them to see me, Donovan," she whispered, her fingers tracing the cheap metal. "Not the ghost of the wife you lost, but the woman I am now." "And who is that woman?" Donovan asked softly, turning her in his arms so he could look into those violet blue eyes. Elena looked past him, through the glass doors, to the sleeping child who had saved her life with a single word. She thought of the diner, the grease, the loneliness, and the bullet she had put into Marco to save her family. "I'm the one who stayed," she said. "I'm the one who fought back." She leaned up, kissing him with a fierce, claiming passion. "I am whole, Donovan." Inside the room, Mia shifted in her sleep. She let out a long, contented sigh and murmured a single, sweet word into the darkness. "Mama." Elena smiled, tears of pure gratitude glistening in the moonlight. She rested her head against her husband's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I'm here, baby," she whispered to the silence, making a promise that would last a lifetime. Mama is here to stay. And that is the incredible story of how one little girl's first word brought down an empire and reunited a family. It shows us that the bond between a mother and child is stronger than memory, stronger than trauma, and certainly stronger than any mafia hitman. Elena Santoro wasn't just saved by her husband. She was saved by the love of her daughter, proving that truth always finds a way to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a daily dose of drama, romance, and karma. What would you do if you found out your whole life was a lie? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.